It's pretty much the morning after the night before, because Friday evening was a big deadline in, well, the BBC story, but it's become sort of US UK story as well.
It has, and in a really dramatic episode of, I think, what is part of the world we live in now, there's a sort of US UK kind of shared media echo chamber space with lots of big voices in it. But yesterday was the deadline for the BBC to reply to Donald Trump, who had threatened to sue after the admitted mistake in editing his speech in an episode of Panorama. The BBC had said sorry, but said, "We're not going to give you any money." This is what Donald Trump said on Air Force One.
We'll sue them for anywhere between $1 billion and $5 billion, probably sometime next week.
So you're ready to take?
Well, I think I have to do it. I mean, they've even admitted that they cheated. I mean, not that they couldn't have not done that. They cheated. They changed the words coming out of my mouth. That's worse than what CBS did with Kamala. They changed her answer, but at least they didn't show it, coming out of her mouth.
Do you think it's appropriate that British TV viewers have to pay more than $200 just for the right to watch television? Do you think the license?
Well, I don't know what they do in a place that I like a lot, in general UK, right? But the people of the UK are very angry about what happened, as you can imagine, because it shows the BBC is fake news. Of course, you and I knew that for a long time, but we didn't know it was this fake.
Have you raised the issue with Sir Keir Starmer?
I have not, but I'll call him. I'm going to call him over the weekend. He actually put a call into me. He's very embarrassed by it. I don't know what percentage is owned by the country.
So then the other thing that happened was that he gave an interview to GB News, which was released at about midnight, which is why it's obviously Saturday's news. I mean, it would be all week news, but the reason we're going to get to grips with it and unpack it on Saturday's newscast.
It's Laura in the studio.
It's Paddy in the studio.
And a bit later, we will be speaking to our Chief North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who is down the road from Mar-a-Lago. So it has been an incredibly dramatic time since we spoke last. I think on last Sunday's newscast, you weren't here, but I said, I think this is not a nothing burger, this story, but it's unclear where it is going to end. Well, a few hours later, Deborah Turness resigned. Tim Davie resigned, the head of news and the boss of the BBC. And then things have taken a very serious turn. We now have the most powerful man in the Western world, seemingly, adamantly, on a path to taking legal action against the UK's public service broadcaster.
And Donald Trump has form. He has threatened to sue Rupert Murdoch's companies for $10 billion. He's sued many other firms in the United States. Now, what we're going to have to discuss this time is the legal jurisdiction and the obvious mistakes made by the BBC and whether that amounts to a court case.
Indeed, and whether it amounts to a court case, and if it does amount to a court case, what might happen. Now, I think what we should say right off the bat is that there is no way with any certainty of predicting where this might end. Often, court cases, the law is sort of a living, breathing animal, in a way, metaphorically. The law is often made by unprecedented things happening. You can't be sure what might happen in what would be an incredibly unusual case if it ever gets to court. And earlier in the week, our excellent colleague Dominic Kashani, who's got a legal brain, went through some of the rhyme and reason that might help us understand what could happen. But let's just say off the bat, there is no certainty about this. So we are not newscasters going to say to you categorically, Donald Trump can or cannot sue the BBC. And if he did, this is what would or would not happen.
And one of the key questions is jurisdiction. Now, in the UK, the defamation clock runs out after a year. So that can't include this fated edition of Panorama, which contains admitted mistakes by the BBC. It can't happen in the UK.
There's then a question not just of chronology, but there's a different question of geography, is whether or not this particular documentary was ever seen in America. Now, it wasn't broadcast in the United States. It was a UK production. It obviously sat on the UK iPlayer, but as newscasters will know, if you're in the US, you can't get on iPlayer. You can't access the BBC's terrestrial broadcasts nor its digital platform of iPlayer. So there also is the issue of whether or not Donald Trump's legal team could ever prove that this had any kind of impact in the United States at all.
That's one of the BBC's key planks of defence. Mistakes, yes. Seen in the US, no. Therefore, this ain't the jurisdiction. I mean, believe me, they're not using that phrase. Then the other thing, of course, is the damage done. The BBC's defence is that he was re-elected as president. Therefore, there's no sign of material damage. And they also deny malice, which is another part of the law here, or there rather, in the United States, because they said it was an unintentional error not intended to mislead.
And don't forget, also, a fundamental part of American democracy is protection of freedom of speech. So the First Amendment to the US Constitution gives very significant cover for media organizations, especially when it comes to covering public figures. That doesn't mean that he wouldn't have a case. That's not what I'm saying. But the precedent here is very strong protections from freedom of speech. Now, we have, as we referenced at the beginning, seen Donald Trump challenge that and go after American news organizations in various different ways. Mistakes or not, I'm not excusing mistakes in journalism. When journalists make mistakes, they should put their hands up and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. But it is not common for incredibly powerful politicians to go after news organisations in this way. So let's also say that on the record.
Earlier, I gave a brief outline of some of the BBC's defence. Some of the doubling down by the US president is that there's another example been brought to his attention. This is an earlier edit done on Newsnight. And there are differences because there was a live guest on the programme who drew attention that he didn't like the edit. So there are some differences, but not, says the president's legal team, that's a sign of a pattern, they say, and therefore it's more serious. And he's further said, the US president, that in court proceedings you are allowed to investigate further to make your case, and you can call on all parties to give information that they would otherwise not give if it wasn't a court case.
There's another little wrinkle too, which the letter from the White House legal team is sent to Samir Shah, the chair of the BBC, but at BBC Studios. Now, BBC Studios is actually the BBC's commercial arm. Whether that is a mistake or whether that is something cunning where they see there might be advantage in going to BBC Studios, it's all, I have to say, rather unknown, because this is territory without a map, right? This is uncharted territory, frankly.
And there's another part of the world that is important to this case, which is the state of Florida. That is Donald Trump's home state when he's not at his official residence. And the Florida jury, once shown the evidence, could react in a way that British people wouldn't react, can't explain, because this is home turf. And so if the BBC does not get the case dismissed and it then goes to a Florida jury, well, then we've all seen the movies. You know, the jury is a totally different and unpredictable way of settling defamation cases.
Now, in the last few days, there's been, I think it's fair to say, not that many people coming out and defending the BBC publicly, but the former Director General, Tony Hall, did agree to give us an interview. We'll play the whole thing on tomorrow's programme. But he was very clear in his view that there is no way that the British public's pockets should be troubled by having to stump up any cash for Donald Trump. If he carries on with his threat to sue the BBC in the way that he's gone after American media organisations, can you ever conceive of a situation where the BBC would use the British public's money to pay off the American president? Can you conceive of that?
No, should not happen. And I think, I'm not a lawyer and I don't know about Floridian state law, but my view is that this should be, if necessary, you've got to get their advice on how you keep this going forward. But I can't see I would never, I don't think we should agree to any money being paid to Donald Trump. You're talking about license fee payers' money. You're talking about public money. It would not be appropriate.
So let's go straight to the heart of the action in this story this week and go to Gary O'Donoghue, our chief North America correspondent, who's in West Palm Beach, just right across from Mar-a-Lago. Gary, great to have you with us. How determined do you think Donald Trump is really to go ahead with this?
He seems pretty determined, certainly from his words on Air Force One last night. He's talking about, in many ways, sort of upping the ante in terms of the amount of money he's seeking, $1 to $5 billion. He does feel, he sort of gave the impression he feels obligated to do this. I think I have to do it was the kind of thing he was saying. But he hasn't done it yet. We were checking the court records here until late on Friday, and nothing has been filed yet. We possibly will see that next week. I think it's worth saying, and we haven't really said this in the coverage this week, and I was talking to some academics and some legal experts here yesterday, that kind of when you put these big numbers in these lawsuits, they're kind of a bit for window dressing. And you think about some of the other cases that have settled, they had multi-billion-dollar requests in them, and they ended up settling for $15-16 million. Now, that's still an awful lot of money, and certainly an awful lot of license fee payers' money. But a lot happens between the filing of a lawsuit and it getting anywhere near court. The vast majority of civil cases like this don't end up in court in this country. They settle. But the dynamics of this one are very different, as we know, in terms of the BBC paying out. Certainly in at least one of the other cases of broadcasters here, there was a huge complication about a separate commercial transaction that they were involved in that needed some federal regulatory approval, etc., etc. So there were decent commercial reasons. And what you have seen some evidence here of is some people saying, OK, BBC made mistakes, it's admitted its mistakes, but thank goodness it's not prepared to pay compensation. It's hanging out on that point. Now, we'll see whether that lasts, but there are huge numbers of legal steps between now and anything happening, resulting in the BBC having to pay out any cash. They could even try and get the case transferred to Washington, D.C., for various reasons, according to some of the legal people we spoke to. And, of course, that would potentially be a very different legal environment in terms of juries for the broadcaster.
We should also say, you know, big news organisations often have insurance for these kinds of things happening, because doing the news can be an expensive business. There are very often, I think one thing newscasters might be interested to know, you know, in every newsroom there are lawyers working behind the scenes. When you cover controversial people and controversial subjects, the law is very much, you know, top of mind. So news organisations do have insurance. This is not necessarily something that, you know, people might really be aware of. But obviously the BBC does not want to pay any compensation. They've said that absolutely on the record. Gary, how big a deal is this actually becoming in the US, though? Because obviously in this country it's something a lot of people are talking about. But is it actually playing?
Not much. There is some coverage, as you'd expect, in the sort of big, the major newspapers. Very little coverage in broadcast terms, I would say. Certainly outside of Washington, D.C., you know, the BBC is a brand here, and it's a brand that's growing. There's no question about that, and it's grown significantly over the last few years. But this kind of thing really doesn't register, because Americans are dealing with a whole bunch of other concerns at the moment, not least the cost of living, not least whether or not they're going to go to war with Venezuela, not least what's going to happen with tariffs, all those sorts of other issues. So it doesn't really register all that much. Although, of course, you know, the BBC's brand here is something that I think will suffer, certainly among those who, you know, are out there to be got, if you like, by the BBC. There's a bunch of people who support the BBC. You hear it every day. People talk to you. They stop you in the street. There's a bunch of people who will never support you, who are very hostile. But there's a sort of middle ground that may just see the headlines of this, not dive into the detail, and be slightly influenced by that. So that's I think, the potential risk for the BBC in terms of public opinion here in the United States. But I think it's worth also saying, I don't think this is on the president's mind 24 hours a day. There was a very telling moment in the GB News interview he did where he kind of toyed with the idea, oh, maybe it'd be litigated in your country, he said to the interviewer. Well, that's not someone who's, you know, poring over the legal documentation and understanding that option is already out of the window.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is something that's It's big time for him.
And Laura and I are asking you to peer into the American psyche and into the president's brain, and we can't do that too much because it's just speculation. So what we can do is talk about the politics, which is that he has told the reporter, I think from the Telegraph on Air Force One, that Keir Starmer is embarrassed. He's said that. So do you have much for us on that, Gary, which is not speculation? That is a word said about the British Prime Minister by the US President, which we can rightly talk about on Newscast.
Well, we've had nothing confirmed on that. We've had that characterisation of Keir Starmer's attitude has not been confirmed. What we understand, and this is from the President's own words, is that there was a call from Keir Starmer which seems not to have been returned at the time. We don't know when that took place, but there will be a call, according to the President, over this weekend in between the 18-hole rounds of golf. So we'll see what comes of that. You know, the government, as you know, in the UK have, they have weighed in to some degree, but they don't want to get, or seem not to have wanted to get directly involved in any discussion between the President and the BBC. But this call was brought up on Air Force One in the context of the BBC discussion. So the President clearly thinks there's going to be some discussion between him and the Prime Minister about the BBC. We'll see what transpires from that. And I think, there will be other attempts, perhaps other people might try to talk to the President about the BBC. I certainly think, when you talk to BBC staff, that's what they would like to see, some kind of attempts to talk this one down a little bit. But at the moment, we don't know exactly what the Prime Minister's involvement is going to be.
And nor did anyone in Number 10 when I asked about it today. Like, has there been a call? They didn't really recognise what the President said on Air Force One. We're recording this at just before 2:30 on Saturday, and there hasn't been a call yet. There was not a call fixed in the diary. And I'm not saying they disputed what Donald Trump said. What I'm saying is they didn't necessarily recognise it. So we'll see, and there will be, if there is a call, then of course we'll tell you about it on tomorrow's newscast, but at the moment that is not clear. It puts the government in a tricky position here because yes, the BBC is a very important institution. Yes, this government I think is broadly supportive of the notion of having a strong BBC, and yes, this Labour Party would not want to see the BBC or frankly any other big institution in the UK be sort of targeted by a foreign government. However, as we know, and we've talked about so many times, they are also incredibly concerned to try to preserve a good relationship with Donald Trump. And Keir Starmer has taken some brickbats from his own side over appearing to be, a bit cringy, perhaps sometimes in terms of trying to make that relationship. But he will step very carefully into anything that might make the Trump White House cross.
Gary, coincidentally, all is not well in the MAGA camp at the moment. There's been one of the best known names who has been linked as a supporter of Donald Trump has fallen out with him. And I was surprised because I thought this showed a great confidence in the president to be taking on the BBC. And I was surprised to read that there's also trouble at Mill. And
it's Epstein. It's Epstein, the issue that will not go away for this president. And it's in some ways, in many ways, it's a problem of his own making, because he and his supporters and the vice president said repeatedly on the election trail that they would publish everything. They have published some stuff. A congressional committee has published more stuff this week, which has Donald Trump's name coming up in various emails between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, is serving 20 years for child trafficking. And now, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the most MAGA of MAGA people in Congress, the woman who turns up to the State of the Union in the hat and the full garb, the woman who Donald Trump has described variously as fantastic, smart, totally respected, etc., is now, according to Donald Trump, a raving lunatic. A raving lunatic is the latest characterization. And so, and why is this? Well, Epstein is one because she knows that the Republican base feels a bit betrayed by the administration's failure to turn over all this stuff from the Department of Justice. They want to see what's in those files. They think it's one of those totemic things about the deep state and elites and what they got away with and and how, victims are suffering and no one else is paying the price, etc. So that's an important one. But it's not just that. She's also been very upset recently about healthcare costs, and which was, in many ways the cause of the shutdown, this record shutdown we've just had. She's been upset about that, and she's been upset about Donald Trump spending so much time abroad doing foreign wars. And now they've really fallen out. He's not going to endorse her. I mean, there's lots and lots of back and forth. She said she's not going to worship him. God she will worship, she said. Jesus is my saviour. So it is a moment, and we'll see if anyone else follows suit or gets any encouragement from this. But it does show you, I think, how being disconnected from your base can bubble up into much more significant rows, and it doesn't look good. And we'll see if anyone else follows on with that. But that has been the Epstein thing, and I think I'm right in saying that the GB News interview didn't ask him about this story of the week, the Jeffrey Epstein story. But he can't escape it at the moment, and it's an itch that the Republican Party keeps wanting to scratch, and it's causing him problems. And of course, one of the lawsuits he's filed here in Florida against the Wall Street Journal is about Epstein and about that famous birthday book with the alleged picture that Donald Trump wrote in it, and that rather sort of suggestive message. That was, by the way, just for context, that was filed here back in July. Here we are in November, and that's still just kind of trundling along. So if you're expecting necessarily a quick conclusion to the BBC case, if the action is pursued, then you might have to wait a while.
We might have to wait a while, but we didn't have to wait to hear about the splits that are emerging in the MAGA movement. I'm sure Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is somebody who's been on the very sharpest edge of that movement, would not agree with the characterisation that she was a raving lunatic, as the American president says. But it's really interesting, Gary, it's very interesting indeed to hear about all the rumblings and goings on at Mar-a-Lago.
Do you think he'll pick up the phone to you again? I mean, he famously picked up the phone to you once before, his team did. Do you think you're going to get a call from the White House?
I'm guessing not immediately. Obviously, my phone is here somewhere, so the invitation is always there. I know that I can probably tell you that, I've tried to make some calls, and none of those are getting returned at the moment. So I think the atmosphere is wrong, and certainly we are not getting any cooperation from Donald Trump's lawyers, for example. We're here in Florida, and we were in Miami yesterday, and it became very clear that even if there was a public statement about their intentions, they planned not to email it to us.
Well, we will see. Gary, thank you so much for joining us from Mar-a-Lago. And is that actually Mar-a-Lago right behind you?
It is, over the water, about half a mile. Over there. There was a police boat here a moment ago. There's a guy fishing somewhere down this way. I'm not sure what he's trying to catch, but yeah. And the president is over there, possibly out golfing already.
Go get your long lenses. We'll talk to you soon.
Oh, and
something's happening. Is it Donald Trump?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
So the other news this weekend is largely coming out of the Home Office, or at least the government would like it to be largely coming out of the Home Office and not coming out of dreadful, sad, angry briefings. And a phrase that was used by a minister to me to sum up the mood among ministers in government at the moment. And I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this on Newscast, but we can put the beep in if we can, because that's always funny to hear that. Eye-rolling and pissed off at the complete shambles that has taken place some of this week, with the income tax on and off and on and off and off again, and the self-inflicted disastrous briefing out of Downing Street, which advertised just how vulnerable they think the Prime Minister might be. Ministers in this government, some of them are increasingly cross, hacked off, desperate, annoyed at what some of them see is the continual undermining of their work by mistakes that are made in Downing Street.
Yes, and we've raised this at the end of Adam's 25-hour podcast-thon, when it was Laura Koonsberg, Henry Zeffman, Adam Fleming and Chris Mason.
And you?
Well, yes, but I'm not a political specialist. And I said to you, can I ask you, boffins,
Yes.
should secret sources be bottled? Because it's all this briefing links them together.
Yes.
Brief, I am a secret source. Wes Streeting, he cannot have me. And I am a secret source. Income tax may very well have to rise. And then within days, no. And I'm having an inquiry about who this is. And this whole system of briefing stands to shoddily looking like it can't be relied on.
Well, I don't think that's true. Because I think actually, uniquely in this country, journalists beavering away have an incredible amount of access to people who make decisions on all our behalf. And there are all sorts of different kinds of briefings. And I always use this example, but I think this is useful. During almost every day of Theresa May's time as Prime Minister, I could have written a story where I said, 10 sources have told me that Theresa May should be gone off with her head, right? Only when you have 10 people who didn't used to think that is that a story about a change in mood. Does that make sense? So since Keir Starmer's been in charge, you could have written a story with 10 people have told me today that Keir Starmer is not the most charismatic leader that we've ever had, and I'm a bit worried about that. You could have written that since 2020 when he became the Labour Party leader. But the way that people's views change over time, if you now had 10 people saying, yes, we've always known Keir wasn't very charismatic, but actually now I think that number 10 are making so many mistakes that this is not sustainable, that is a difference. And the reason some people want to stay anonymous is because they'd lose their jobs if they spoke out publicly. But it's a way that we can get information out there into the public domain. Of course, saying this at a time like this, of course, journalists have to treat that information responsibly and think carefully about who the person is telling you and why they are telling you. But I can tell you from talking to people at the top of government and talking to plenty of them this week that the mood inside government and the mood among ministers, I sense, is changing, and that patience is really wearing very, very, very thin.
Yeah, because it's unforced errors is the sort of common denominator, isn't it?
Exactly. And at the moment, the government should be preparing for two massive defining moments. Immigration reform, which we're going to hear about from the Home Secretary tomorrow, which they are trying to claim is the most dramatic since the Second World War. They're really going to be able to change this terrible situation. And the budget, which is also going to be a very heavy piece of work and a hugely influential moment for this government. But those two big defining acts are being drowned out by just what was put to me as somebody is just saying, look, incompetent politics in number 10. Now, of course, you might not believe that somebody actually said this, but in number 10, the number 10 source said to me today, actually, we've had a very good week.
Right, okay.
And I said, what on earth do you mean? And they said, well, look, hang on a minute. So politically, we're not going to have to break our manifesto promise on income tax. And economically, that's positive because we don't have to do that because the economy's looking better and wage growth is feeding into the public coffers.
Yeah, I mean...
But it's a mess. And I don't have time to read you all the things that people said to me, but you can read them all on the website.
Okay, so let's just scamper through as we get to the closing minutes about what we expect to be in the immigration plan, which is based on Denmark's systems.
Yes. So, I mean, look, the big thing so far, and there will be more tomorrow that I can't yet tell you about because it's been told to me by secret sources, is refugee status is going to be temporary in this country. That is a big change. So in other words, if you come from a war-torn country where awful things and you are fleeing in danger, if your country becomes safe again, the UK government will say, you have to leave the UK and go back there. And that is a big change. And so far, that is at the sort of top of the list of changes that we're going to hear about tomorrow.
And also, basically, moving to a country is once you take a decision to move from a safe country to another country, which is part of the criticism made, is that it's competitive. So if you want to know where is the best outcome for my status,
yes.
And if Denmark makes it ain't here, that means you might choose to go to another country other than Denmark. So it goes into the head of the asylum seeker. Don't put Denmark at the top of your list.
And it may or may not. So this is the government has always said they have to address pull factors and push factors. And they always use one of my least favourite political phrases, which should never be used because it doesn't make sense to any normal person. There is no silver bullet. I mean, what's a silver bullet anyway? But there's no one thing that can change what's a very complicated problem. So they're looking at a variety of things, and we're going to hear all about them tomorrow. But it's definitely going to be in the context of Shabana Mahmood, new Home Secretary, trying to show that she's taking tough action.
Okay, and we're going to move on from that because there'll be more tomorrow. I think I can answer what a silver bullet is.
Yeah, go on.
Which is it's how you kill a werewolf. So
What?
That's how you would kill a werewolf.
What?
Yes. There's no point putting your ordinary lead bullet in when you've got a werewolf coming towards you. You use a silver bullet. So I hope you never need to worry about that phrase again, Laura Koonsberg.
Well, let's never use it again.
Well, no, now you can use it with greater confidence.
Oh.
The werewolf of suspicion. I'm going to kill with my silver bullet. That's how it works. You need never worry again.
Okay, I shall never worry again. Do you know what I did find though worrying?
Me? Usually that's the answer.
Your face when sitting next to Pudsey Bear. We're introducing a new feature on this audio product called Picture of the Week.
I think
Classic absurd newscast pattern. In case you missed it, yesterday morning, Paddy and I joined Adam at the end of his podcast-a-thon that went on for many, many hours. And Pudsey Bear, a large yellow fur creature, bear, came in at the end. When Pudsey Bear arrived in the studio, my friend and colleague's face was quite something to behold. And I'd like to say to the nation of newscasters that if you didn't see it, go on iPlayer, and it was on the news this morning at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. And you can see it for yourself, because I found it both very alarming and entertaining all at the same time.
it is. I do look a bit staggered. But anyway, it was the good news of it all, because we have had messages from people who are kinder than you about the podcast-a-thon. Katie and her son Josiah, Alice and Sarah, Alison, Mary, Catherine in Stafford is on WhatsApp. And they were saying that they enjoyed the 25 hours.
And I think that was a very good thing. And it was amazing that all that money got raised. My only issue with it is your face.
Okay, so that means it's definitely the end. We congratulate the amazing Children in Need team and Pudsey. Were Pudsey to return, I would look him full in the eye, whichever eye isn't bandaged. But look, that's the end, Laura. You've got to say goodbye without laughing. You've got to. I'll do it on your behalf. Thank you very much for listening to Saturday's newscast. And from Laura and I, goodbye.